We are now on to wide receiver tiers. If you missed quarterback tiers, if you missed running back tiers, make sure to check those videos out. But this is the last video in this little mini series where we're tiering players for the NFL season. Just as a reminder, similar to quarterbacks and running backs, this is just for 2025. This is real football, not fantasy football. And we're essentially putting all 32 starting wide receivers into tiers. That's the premise. Pretty self-explanatory. Let's jump into the tiers themselves. It looks a little bit different from quarterbacks and running backs. Quarterbacks and running backs had a little bit more of a normal distribution. There's just so many good starting wide receivers. It pretty much forms a pyramid. We got a lot at the bottom before slowly moving up to the top guy for this year. And similar to running backs, this isn't the 32 best wide receivers. I recognize that. Guys like T. Higgins, Davante Adams, some of the other best wide receiver twos on their team aren't going to be on this list. There is going to be some debate on who the wide receiver one is on some of these teams. I'll bring it up when we get to those players, but for the most part, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So let's start off with the bottom tier. In alphabetical order, I have Stefon Diggs, Jerry Jeudy, Jakobi Meyers, Michael Pittman Jr., Jayden Reed, Calvin Ridley, and Khalil Shakir. I think the first thing that stands out in this tier is there's a couple really good teams, and potentially two of the best teams in the NFL, the Packers and the Bills. The Packers I had Jayden Reed from the beginning. I know he's hurt right now. You could put Romeo Doubs, you could put Matthew Golden. I think all of the players you would put are probably down in this bottom tier. The hope is Matthew Golden at some point, maybe potentially later in this season, turns into more of a wide receiver one. But for right now, the Packers are just kind of a collection of wide receiver twos, wide receiver threes. It's more about their depth than a true number one. So I think any of the guys fit in this tier. And then same thing with the Bills. I think Khalil Shakir is their number one receiver. But as I've talked about in the past, the Bills made this decision. We don't really need a number one receiver. We're going to let go of Stefon Diggs, and this is just going to be Josh Allen's team. Shakir, I think, is a good wide receiver. I like Josh Palmer. Keon Coleman, you could argue, is the wide receiver one. All three, I think, are good receivers. Just none of them really stand out as true wide receiver ones. So two really good teams don't really have a true wide receiver one on their team, but that doesn't matter for their success. The rest of the guys in this tier, solid veterans, and I think there's just so many talented receivers that, yes, you could tell me that Jerry Jeudy is actually a really good receiver. You could tell me Calvin Ridley is a good receiver. Jakobi Meyers I like. Michael Pittman has had success. Stefon Diggs at one point was a top 10 receiver. All of these guys right now are just solid veterans. Maybe not true wide receiver ones, but if they are your wide receiver one, that's fine. It's nothing against them. They just don't really move the needle like some of the guys. And that just shows just how deep wide receiver is right now in football. As we go to the next tier, this is where we get to some pretty good wide receivers. And you might be surprised that they're in the second to last tier. But again, it just speaks to the depth right now in football. In this tier, I have Zay Flowers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jawan Jennings, Teteroa McMillan, DK Metcalf, Chris Olave, and Courtland Sutton. There's some good receivers in this bunch. And there's a couple young guys that over the next couple years might move up into one of these top tiers. I really like Teteroa McMillan. He's had a great start to the season. Right now, I have to put him in this tier, but I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the year if he moves up. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. You could put him in the bottom tier if you want. You could still believe in him and think he's going to be a top 10 receiver. Right now, I think he fits in this tier. He's not as bad as people think, but he has had his issues. We'll just put it that way to start the year. I'm okay putting him here for now. I just really want to see more from him. And then the rest are just more, I don't want to call them veteran receivers because guys like Zay Flowers haven't been in the league that long. DK Metcalf is still relatively young. Jawan Jennings, you could argue if it should be Ricky Pearsall. I think both those guys are kind of underrated wide receivers. So this is the group of some talented young guys, some veterans that maybe get overlooked sometimes, but just overall good receivers. Again, maybe not your true number ones yet, but good wide receiver ones if that's the case. Moving on to the next tier, this is where we get to some actual, like, true number one receivers. Like in bold wide receiver one, there's some good names on this tier, so just be prepared. I have Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, Ladd McConkey, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, Rashee Rice, and Garrett Wilson. Rashee Rice, I get, is suspended. I think when he comes back, he's the clear number one. I think he's a good receiver. He definitely belongs in this tier, and we'll show that once he gets back. The rest of these guys, I think at times, are true wide receiver ones. Tyreek Hill at some point was the best receiver in football. Mike Evans has been just a reliable wide receiver 1 for a long time. Terry McLaurin had a great year. Ladd McConkey had a breakout year last year. Garrett Wilson, he's survived everything that's going on in the Jets. He's, I think, still a wide receiver 1 based on talent. DJ Moore is maybe the one you could argue. It almost looks like Rome Odunze is going to take over that role. I still think right now DJ Moore is a really good receiver. The Bears maybe aren't utilizing him the best to start the year. Rome Odunze is kind of breaking out. I still think DJ Moore's great, whether he stays in Chicago or goes elsewhere. But overall, this tier is just loaded with good receivers. And I feel bad putting him in the 4th tier. It again just shows how talented and how many good receivers there are in the league. Moving on to tier 3, this is where we get to some really hard decisions. There's a lot of good receivers left, and I had to break them out into 3 tiers somehow, so here's how I did it. I have AJ Brown, Drake London, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas Jr. Now, as I said, there's going to be some hard decisions. There's going to be some really good debates if you want to have them. To me, there's a clear, almost tier within these tiers. It's the top 3 tiers and the bottom 3 tiers. I think the top 3 tiers, if you wanted to make the case for them as a top 5 receiver, you can make a pretty easy argument. And all of these guys, except for maybe AJ Brown, are still on the rise. They're still only in their 2nd, 3rd, 4th year in the league, and they've already shown just how elite they can be. And so I'm okay if you want to say these guys should be in tier 2. It's going to be hard once you hear the names in tier 2, and you can imagine the names in the top 2 tiers. But these are some of the best receivers in the league, and they're only getting better. I will note Brian Thomas Jr., I still have him here. I get it's been a disaster start. I think it's more either injury related or just maybe not trusting Trevor Lawrence, which I don't know if I blame him. I still think he's one of the most talented and best receivers in the league. I'm not going to overreact to a few weeks. I still think he deserves near the top. Now on to tier 2, really the best of the best. I have Nico Collins, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Puka Nacua, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that leaves Ja'Marr Chase as my number 1 receiver in tier 1. I'm going to talk about these guys in a group. I do think Ja'Marr Chase stands out as your tier 1 receiver right now. Similar to running backs and quarterbacks, I like having one guy at the top if possible. I think based on last year, there's really no debate. Ja'Marr Chase is the number 1 receiver right now. That doesn't mean it can't change. And certainly now without Joe Burrow, his numbers aren't going to be great. That's fine. I think pure wide receiver, it's still Ja'Marr Chase. You can make the argument, though, for the 5 guys below him pretty easily. The rest of the guys are amazing, and you can't really argue against them. In terms of their production, in terms of how they do this year, it's really just going to be their situation. And I think Nico Collins is a great example. I don't know how Nico Collins is going to do this year. I don't know how he's going to do from a fantasy perspective, from just real life stats perspective. But Nico Collins to me is still a top 5, top 6 receiver. I think he belongs in this tier. The other guys speak for themselves. Justin Jefferson at one point was the number 1 receiver. CeeDee Lamb at some point was probably the number 1 receiver. You can make really good cases for both Puka and Amon-Ra that they should be the number 1 receiver right now. These are the best of the best. That's why it's hard in the tier 3. I mean, we're talking Drake London, JSN, Malik Neighbors. Those are really, really good receivers. But to me, that's where the top 3 tiers just stand out. Those to me are the top 11. You could maybe argue, a Tyreek Hill, a Ladd McConkey. But to me, the top 11 kind of separate themselves. It's an impossible task kind of separating them from there. But this is how I did it. You can argue if you want, but they're just all phenomenal receivers. So as I mentioned, that will do it for my tiers. Go check out quarterbacks. Go check out running back tiers, which I have put up over the last couple of weeks. I will update these probably twice a year. I will update these tiers towards the end of the season and then back when NFL starts up again next year. So if you want to see more, if you liked this video, again, make sure to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for future updates and other videos. I got plenty more NFL stuff coming. So even though we're done with tiers, I'm going to be starting some more NFL and college related things. I'm going to be looking at colleges within the NFL. So we're talking, who's the QBU, who's the DBU, who's the wide receiver U, things like that. We're going to break that out into a few different videos. So make sure to subscribe if you want to see all of that, and we will see you in the next video.